Education in America was born from the ideals of the Enlightenment, a time when knowledge was seen not as a commodity, but as a moral force. In the 18th century, schools were small, personal, and deeply connected to civic virtue. The goal was not simply to read or calculate, but to cultivate wisdom and moral strength. The Founding Fathers believed education was the foundation of democracy, that a free society could not exist without educated citizens capable of reasoning, questioning, and understanding history. In those early classrooms, students studied philosophy, history, and geography to learn about the human condition, the world they inhabited, and the moral choices that define character. Education was not yet an institution. It was a journey of the mind. But as the 19th century unfolded, the country changed. The Industrial Revolution transformed the landscape, and with it, the purpose of education. Factories needed workers. Society needed order. The Common School movement, led by reformers like Horace Mann, promised to educate every child, but it also introduced the logic of standardization. Schools became organized, hierarchical, and efficient, mirrors of the factories rising across America. The goal shifted from forming thinkers to producing citizens who could fit within the system. Geography and history remained, but their purpose changed. They no longer encouraged reflection, but patriotism. They became tools to unify the nation, not to expand the mind. Philosophy, once at the core of learning, began to disappear from the curriculum. By the dawn of the 20th century, education had become a system of control. The progressive era brought great debates between two visions of schooling. John Dewey imagined classrooms as laboratories of democracy, places where students learned through experience and dialogue. Edward Thorndike, on the other hand, viewed education as a science of behavior, measurable, predictable, and efficient. Dewey wanted to cultivate curiosity. Thorndike wanted to measure performance. The nation chose Thorndike. Schools became laboratories of compliance. Learning was reduced to testing and teaching to management. Subjects that encouraged open thought, geography, philosophy, history, were declared non-essential. Students were trained, not educated. By mid-century, after two world wars, and in the heat of the Cold War, education had a new mission: to serve the state. Classrooms were no longer places to explore meaning. They were tools in a geopolitical race. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 sparked a wave of panic in the United States. The response was the National Defense Education Act, pouring money into science, math, and technology. The humanities, the study of who we are, where we come from, and why we exist, faded into the background. Philosophy was deemed impractical. History became selective, retelling patriotic myths while silencing uncomfortable truths. Geography, the study of place and interconnection, was reduced to memorizing maps. The child was no longer seen as a mind to awaken, but a resource to develop. In the late 20th century, another transformation began, one driven not by ideology, but by economics. Under neoliberal reforms of the 1980s and 1990s, education was rebranded as a market. Schools became competitive. Students became consumers. Knowledge became a product. The value of learning was measured by its profitability. STEM subjects rose to dominance, while the humanities were dismissed as luxuries. Philosophy departments shrank, history courses were cut, and geography vanished from elementary education altogether. The question was no longer, what kind of person should education form, but what kind of worker does the economy need? The language of wisdom gave way to the language of efficiency. Success was no longer about understanding life, but about optimizing it. By the time we entered the 21st century, the world had changed again, this time digitally. Technology promised to democratize knowledge, but it also fragmented it. Students gained access to infinite information, yet lost the ability to find meaning. Screens replaced dialogue. Algorithms replaced teachers. Essays were graded by software, and understanding was replaced by metrics. The deeper subjects, geography, history, philosophy, became nearly invisible in many schools. Students learned how to follow rubrics, but not how to question assumptions. They learned how to find answers, but not how to ask better questions. We built a generation that can code but not contemplate, that can calculate but not reflect. We optimized education, but in doing so, we stripped it of its soul. Today, American education stands at a crossroads. We live in an age of unprecedented access to data and unprecedented confusion about truth. We have more information than ever before, but less understanding. The subjects that once gave us context and perspective have nearly vanished. Without philosophy, we no longer learn how to think critically about the world. Without history, we forget who we are and how we arrived here. Without geography, we lose our sense of connection to place, to culture, to the planet itself. A society without these foundations becomes one that cannot see beyond the present moment. It becomes a society without memory, without meaning, without direction. Education was once the art of awakening the mind. It taught us not what to think, but how to think. It gave us the ability to discern truth from falsehood, to navigate moral complexity, and to understand the beauty and tragedy of human existence. But as the system evolved, that purpose was replaced by performance. Today's schools measure outcomes, not insight; productivity, not perspective. The goal is to produce measurable success, not meaningful understanding. Yet there is hope. Across the nation, new movements are calling for the revival of the humanities. Teachers, scholars, and parents are recognizing that education without philosophy, history, and geography is incomplete. They understand that data without context leads to confusion, and that intelligence without wisdom leads to collapse. To rebuild education, we must restore what has been lost. We must reintroduce the subjects that teach us how to think, how to question, and how to connect. We must once again see education not as preparation for work, but as preparation for life. Because without philosophy, there is no reflection. Without history, there is no identity. Without geography, there is no belonging. And without all three, education ceases to be an act of liberation. It becomes an act of training. The challenge before us is not technological, but philosophical. The question is not how we can teach faster, but how we can teach meaningfully. Education was never meant to create obedience. It was meant to create understanding. It was never about producing efficient workers. It was about cultivating wise citizens. The Enlightenment once lit the path for human freedom through knowledge. Today, that light flickers, but it has not gone out. It lives on in every teacher who still dares to ask why, in every student who still hungers for truth, and in every voice that refuses to reduce learning to performance. A nation that forgets how to think cannot remain free. It is time to remember what education was meant to be. Not a system, not a factory, not a market, but a mirror of our humanity, a place where we learn not only to make a living, but to make a life.